My mother-in-law banned me from the family dinner, not knowing my husband was planning to announce our divorce there. But I'd already bought the house they were dining in, and had one surprise left. Hello, thank you for your support. This means a lot to us. We're on a journey to our first 100 subscribers. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Mark Grayson from Washington. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. He waited until my seat at the table was empty before announcing the divorce. I know this because Lila, my husband's cousin, one of the few in that family with a soul, texted me a single line halfway through the roast chicken. He did it. No name, no explanation. Just that. And I understood. Because 3 days earlier, my mother-in-law had called to say that this year's family dinner was just for blood relatives. She said it gently, as if it were some long-standing rule I'd simply forgotten. I almost laughed at the effort it took for her to make cruelty sound like protocol. I told her I understood. I even thanked her. But in that moment, something in me quietly calcified. Not rage, not yet. Just a kind of resolve I hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that waits. I'd always known Margaret didn't like me. But I underestimated how much she enjoyed not liking me. It gave her a kind of purpose. From the moment Daniel and I got serious, she saw me not as a person, but as a blemish on the life she'd curated for her son. My laugh was too loud. My family too small. My degree not quite academic enough. My manners just a shade too blunt. Never anything she'd say directly. Margaret didn't operate like that. Her game was quieter. Polished. When she corrected my pronunciation of endive at a garden brunch, she smiled while doing it. When she left me out of the annual Christmas card, she said it was the photographer's fault. I took it. For years I took it. The irony is that I'd already left the marriage. Not on paper but emotionally, spiritually, whatever word fits when the man you married begins to shrink inside his skin every time you enter the room. Daniel had become something else entirely in those final months. Agreeable, absent, and surgically kind. His apologies were too perfect. His silences too smooth. I could feel him setting the stage for an exit, but I hoped, he'd have the decency to face me directly. I didn't know he was waiting for an audience. I didn't know his mother would be the one to write me out of the scene before the curtain lifted. And maybe that was the final betrayal, not the divorce itself, but the way they tried to orchestrate my erasure like it was strategy. I sat on the floor of the condo that night, barefoot in leggings, the last moving box beside me unopened. The unit still smelled like primer and sawdust. My name was the only one on the lease. I hadn't told anyone where I was yet. The windows were huge and dark, reflecting my outline like a warning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened a bottle of wine with a steak knife and drank it straight from the neck. Then I did something small and quiet, something that would mean nothing to anyone else. I deleted Daniel's contact from my phone. Not blocked. Not erased. Just removed. It felt cleaner that way, like turning off a light in an empty room. Lila sent one more message before midnight. This time a photo. A shot of the dinner table. Everyone seated. Margaret at the head. Daniel raising his glass mid-toast. The caption said, "He looks relieved. She looks smug." I stared at it until my battery died. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because 3 weeks earlier, without telling a soul, I'd purchased the deed to the very house they were eating in. And I had one more surprise left. I didn't answer any of his calls. Not the first one, not the last. Not the 3 that came in rapid succession at 2:11 a.m. the day after the dinner. He didn't leave voicemails. Daniel was never reckless like that. But he sent a text. Just one. "I'm sorry. I didn't know she didn't invite you." 12 words. I stared at them so long the screen dimmed. I didn't believe him. Not because it was a lie, but because it was too carefully worded to be the truth. It wasn't remorse. It was insulation. He was trying to place the betrayal one step away from himself, like a man lifting his palms at the scene of a fire, saying, "I just lit the match, I didn't drop it." And I realized then that he wouldn't fight to keep me, not even out of guilt. I wasn't something he'd lost. I was something he'd successfully offloaded. I vanished quietly.
No announcements.
No performative starting over posts with latte art and sunrise captions. I changed my number, deleted our shared calendar, and shipped the final papers to my attorney with a note that said no revisions. He was stunned, I'm sure. Daniel was the type of man who counted on delayed reactions. He expected the argument, the bargaining, the grief. He'd built his exit strategy around a version of me that would fall apart in a predictable, polite way. But instead I left clean, precise, almost surgical, and that more than rage or tears is what men like him fear the most. Not the scream, but the silence after it. The kind that echoes. The condo became my cocoon. I ordered blackout curtains and didn't open them for 3 weeks. I slept on the floor by choice. I stopped wearing makeup. I let the silence expand inside the space until I could hear my own thoughts again, sharp and intact. I didn't miss him. That surprised me. What I missed, if anything, was the idea of being considered. Of being seen. Daniel used to watch me like he was learning me. Somewhere along the way, that gaze turned into a scan, quick, shallow, like he was checking for a malfunction. The last time he kissed me, I could feel the distance behind his lips. It wasn't passion or affection. It was maintenance. Like refueling a car you don't plan to keep. My mother called once during that month. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that started with, "I heard from Karen you weren't at the family dinner," and ended with, "Maybe next year you'll feel more included." As if inclusion were something I needed to earn. As if my absence were my own doing. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It's not loud. And it's never obvious. But it teaches you how to disappear so well that when you finally do, no one even notices. I wasn't just leaving Daniel. I was leaving the version of myself that needed permission to matter. Every morning, I made coffee the same way, black, hot, bitter. I let it sit too long, then reheated it, then drank it anyway. I counted each day by the number of times I didn't text him. I started learning the building's patterns. When the hall lights dimmed, when the woman upstairs walked her dog, when the guy 2 floors down played Coltrane at exactly 9 p.m. There was something almost holy about the repetition. I didn't speak much. Didn't want to. Words felt performative. I wanted stillness. I wanted distance. I wanted to sit in my pain until it stopped twitching. The papers came back signed. No handwritten notes. No post-it. Not even a sigh of hesitation in the ink. I stared at his signature for a long time. It looked practiced. Confident. His full name, not the shortened version he used with me. That somehow hurt more than it should have. I wondered if he had already begun rehearsing his next life. The polished narratives, the single-man anecdotes, the easy charm he wore so well. I could see him sitting at brunch in some overpriced cafe, telling someone new that his ex just checked out. And I could see her, whoever she was, nodding sympathetically, believing it. What he didn't know was that while I was disappearing from him, I was reappearing somewhere else. Quietly. Strategically. I'd found the listing for the house 2 months prior, Margaret's house. The one she always said she'd pass down to the right people. It had been sitting in probate, caught in a legal shuffle after a relative's name was improperly recorded on the deed. Margaret didn't know that. She thought it was safe. Untouchable. She'd kept it out of Daniel's name on purpose too. Her way of maintaining control. But that choice, meant to keep me out, had opened a door. A door I walked through without a sound. The Shell Trust was easy to set up. I had savings. She never asked what I did for work, assumed it was cute or small. I wired the deposit through an LLC registered under my grandmother's maiden name. Every step I took toward that deed felt like an act of erasure in reverse. Not of myself, but of the version of me they thought would disappear without them. The deal closed on a Wednesday. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Lila. The keys came in an unmarked envelope. I held them in my palm for hours that night, unmoving, like they were still warm from someone else's hand. By the time Daniel's lawyer sent the official confirmation of the divorce, I'd already made 3 copies of the house key. And I was counting the days until the next family dinner. It didn't happen all at once, the erasure. It was subtle, like wind over stone. A comment here, a glance there. People talk about betrayal like it's an event, a sharp thing that cuts you in half. But the worst kind doesn't bleed. It accumulates. Quietly. I used to think I was imagining it. That maybe I was too sensitive. Too quick to assign meaning to things people didn't say. But now, looking back, I can name the exact moment I began to shrink around them. Daniel's 30th birthday, his mother's house, the first toast of the night, and not a single mention of me. I had planned the entire thing, called the restaurant, arranged for his college friends to fly in, ordered the cake he liked, the one with the hazelnut ganache and the dark chocolate lettering. Margaret hijacked the plan 3 days before, and told me they'd be hosting it family style. She smiled when she said it, teeth showing, like a cat who'd dragged in something half alive. That night, I sat on the edge of every conversation like a guest who'd overstayed. I tried to join in, asked about his cousin's new baby, his aunt's shoulder surgery, but the replies were clipped, almost rehearsed. At one point, Daniel laughed at something I said, and Margaret immediately changed the subject. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't say anything. That was worse. It wasn't always like that. In the beginning, Daniel loved me out loud. He brought me into every room like a prize, told me I was the only person who made him feel real. And I believed him, because when you grow up invisible, love like that feels like oxygen. For a while he defended me. Margaret called me spontaneous, he said. She's driven. Margaret called me a little abrasive, he said. She's honest. But slowly the correction stopped. And I could feel it in the way he touched me, lighter, like I was made of something fragile and inconvenient. Not a woman. A bruise. I started to dread the invitations. The way they arrived late, like afterthoughts. The way Margaret would always say, "Oh, we assumed Daniel would let you know." I remember one Easter, I brought a homemade quiche, and she made a joke about store-bought crust. It wasn't even funny, but everyone laughed, and I did too. Too loudly, too brightly, like someone trying to outpace their own humiliation. Later that day, I found the quiche in the trash untouched. She said it was an accident. I said it was fine. Daniel said nothing. That night in bed, he kissed my shoulder like an apology he didn't know how to say. I don't think he hated me. That would have been easier. What he felt was something softer, but more lethal, embarrassment. I didn't fit the aesthetic. Margaret collected people the way some women collect art. Beautiful, curated, expensive looking. I was too raw. I didn't smooth myself down for company. I asked uncomfortable questions. I wore flats to brunch, and didn't pretend to like opera. The moment Daniel stopped being proud of that is the moment he began leaving me in pieces, pretending not to notice when I didn't put myself back together. I once told him I felt like a placeholder in my own life. He said, "That's not fair," and rolled over. There's a special kind of ache that comes from realizing you were never in the photograph, just standing behind the camera. I remember Margaret's mantle, the framed memories, the curated nostalgia. Even after 5 years, there was never a photo of me. One Thanksgiving, Daniel whispered, "We'll put one up next time." He said it like a promise. I believed him. Of course I did. That was the problem. I kept giving grace to people who considered me disposable. I kept folding myself small enough to fit into spaces they didn't even want me in, until I forgot what it felt like to take up space at all. They say trauma makes you forget. But for me it made everything sharper. I remember the texture of her linen napkins, the way she'd correct my pronunciation in front of her book club, the time she offered to help me find a more appropriate dress for Daniel's promotion dinner. And the worst part, the part that still lives under my skin like a shard of glass, was how normal it became. I started anticipating the dig, rehearsing my smile, bracing for the next invisible bruise. That's how scar tissue forms. Not from one wound, but from the repeated healing of the same one. Over, and over, and over. By the time Daniel told me he wasn't happy, I wasn't even hurt, just tired, like I'd been holding my breath for 5 years, and was finally allowed to exhale. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't ask what happiness looked like for him now. I just nodded. He looked relieved, and that told me everything I needed to know. He wanted out, and he wanted to look good while doing it. And Margaret, she wanted to win. Not just remove me, but erase me. Like I was a typo in their family story. But I wasn't gone. I was waiting. The first time I stepped into the house after the sale, I didn't touch anything. I just stood in the entryway, shoes still on, letting the silence press against me like a second skin. It smelled exactly the same. lavender polish, citrus furniture spray, and something faintly artificial, like the ghost of a candle that was never actually lit. Margaret had always been obsessive about presentation. Everything in its place, every surface reflecting light. But the house itself felt hollow in that moment, like a stage between performances. And now I wasn't part of the audience anymore. I owned the script. The agent didn't know what the house meant to me. She called it a great long-term asset with historic value. I nodded politely and signed without blinking. I'd used a limited liability trust in the name of my late grandmother, Ruth Ellison, the same woman Margaret once referred to as a rural embarrassment. There was something satisfyingly poetic in that. I didn't need to change a single room. I didn't need to renovate, redesign, or erase the past. No, I wanted it exactly as it was, pristine, curated, falsely perfect. I wanted the walls to still remember her voice, the sharpness of it. I wanted the mirrors to carry the shape of her vanity. I wanted the house to look at her the way I never could without flinching. I didn't tell anyone I'd bought it. Not even Lila. Especially not Daniel. The closing had been clean, discreet. The previous legal tangle in probate made it easy for the transfer to slip beneath the radar. The house had been in Margaret's sister's name, a technicality she assumed meant nothing. But that sister died with medical debt and no will. The lien hit the property. The trust moved in. And I didn't hesitate. While Daniel was strategizing how to make me vanish gracefully, I was buying the floor beneath his mother's dining room chair. It was almost funny. All those years she spent trying to make me feel like I didn't belong. And now I held the deed to her sacred space. Not out of pettiness. Out of precision. The week before the dinner, I had new locks installed. Quietly. Efficiently. I watched the locksmith from the kitchen window, sipping my coffee while he worked. I didn't give him my name, just paid in cash. I wondered fleetingly if Margaret would even notice. She wasn't the type to check small details. She assumed the world stayed the same unless she changed it. That was her flaw. She thought control came from ownership, not observation. But I'd been watching, listening. I knew the grooves in that family's routine. I knew that every second Sunday in April, the family dinner would be held in that house. Potluck style. But Margaret always remade every dish to her liking before it hit the table. I knew she kept the wine in the pantry, not the cellar, because the temperature regulation downstairs wasn't quite right. I knew what time she liked the roast to go in, and I knew with absolute certainty she hadn't checked the mailbox in weeks. I dropped the official change of ownership letter in it myself. No return address. Just the cold authority of a government seal, and the new line of fine print. Legal owner of record. Ruth Ellison Revocable Trust. She would read it too late. She always did. I wasn't planning to attend the dinner. Not originally. My revenge was meant to be private, psychological, structural, lasting. The kind that unfolds slowly, like a bad inheritance. But then Lila called. Breathless. Nervous. She said Margaret had sent out the invites like nothing had happened. Same guest list. Same smug smile in the email signature. She really thinks it's hers, Lila said. And I realized that wasn't enough. Taking the house was satisfying. But letting them see me inside it, that would make it permanent. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need a scene. What I needed was visibility. I needed to sit at that table, in that room, surrounded by the same people who once looked through me like I was fog on a window. I wanted them to see what they'd dismissed. Not louder, not prettier, not angrier. Just there, unshaken, watching them squirm. The day of the dinner I wore black. Not for drama, for contrast. The kind that makes people uncomfortable without knowing why.
No makeup, no jewelry.
I looked like myself, just sharper. Polished but not soft. I parked 3 blocks away and walked. Not out of fear. Out of strategy. I wanted time. Time to feel the cold air. Time to rehearse the quietness of my presence. My heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation. I didn't knock. I walked in through the front door with the key they didn't know I had. The room was full, voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. Margaret was at the head of the table, her back to me. Daniel stood beside her, carving a roast. His tie was crooked. He looked older. Smaller. For a moment no one noticed me. Then Lila did. Her eyes widened. She didn't speak. She just set down her fork. Slowly, one by one, the room followed. The sound fell away like ash. Margaret turned last. The look on her face wasn't shock. It was worse. It was confusion. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she still had the upper hand. I didn't say a word. I just pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table and sat down. For a moment, no one breathed. You could hear the hum of the old refrigerator, the faint tick of Margaret's antique wall clock, the tight clench of a dozen throats swallowing whatever small talk they'd been mid-sentence in. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. His silence was loud enough to fill the space between every word I could have said, but didn't. I placed my hands neatly on the table, the way she used to correct me for not doing. Fingertips together, palms soft. My presence wasn't a shout. It was a scalpel. Precise. Intentional. Measured in inches. Margaret was the first to speak, but it took her 2 tries. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again like she was trying to reset a script that had just corrupted mid-performance. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us, she said, and her voice was even, but it had edges now, rougher, like something under pressure. This dinner was meant to be family only, I said. My tone wasn't hostile. It wasn't anything. That was the beauty of it. She blinked. I watched the gears turning, trying to re-establish control, trying to understand if I'd been invited by mistake, if Daniel had done something behind her back, if maybe someone had forgotten to shut a door, and a ghost had walked through. Because that's what I was to her now. Not a woman. Not a threat. A residue. Something that should have been cleaned off and forgotten. Daniel's voice finally broke through, brittle and thin. Can we talk privately? He asked, eyes flicking toward the hallway like he wanted to quarantine me from the damage. I didn't move. I let the silence answer him first, long enough that someone at the far end of the table coughed into their napkin. You're standing in the wrong house to ask me that, I said. I turned slightly then, just enough to look at him. Really look. The weight of 5 years between us collapsed in that glance. But sure. Let's talk. I stood, walked past him, didn't touch his arm. Didn't wait for him to follow. We ended up in the den. The door clicked shut behind us, and for the first time Daniel looked nervous. Not angry. Not guilty. Just unmoored. Why are you here? He asked, and it sounded more like a plea than a question. I could ask you the same, I said, running my fingers lightly over the leather-bound books on the shelf, Margaret's collection of classics unread and uncreased. But I think we both know the answer to that. He stepped toward me. Stopped short. I didn't know she excluded you. I swear. I turned slowly. But you let her. That's the point, Daniel. You always let her. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Couldn't. I didn't want to do this in front of everyone. He said, almost whispering. Did what? End our marriage. I said. That was already done. You just saved the announcement for the toast. He sat down heavily in the chair by the fireplace, the one Margaret always called her reading throne. I stayed standing. So what is this? Some kind of revenge? He asked, and the word clanged in the room like a cheap cymbal. I smiled slow and cold. No. Revenge would have been messy. This is precision. He shook his head, almost laughing. You bought the house? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence did it for me. The fact that I was there did it. You bought her house. His voice cracked a little on her, like it still meant something. She never put it in your name, I said. Or anyone's. She kept it floating. Thought she was being smart. Turns out she just left the door open for someone smarter. He rubbed his face with both hands, like he was waking up in a nightmare. Jesus, you really went through with it. I told you once, I said, voice low. I don't yell when I'm angry. I plan. He looked up at me, and for the first time since the night he left, I saw fear. Not of me. Of what I'd become in his absence. When we re-entered the dining room, the entire table had gone stiff with expectation. Margaret looked ready to detonate. Is someone going to explain what's going on? She snapped. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did barely. I moved to the head of the table, her seat, and placed my palm flat against the back of the chair. You'll all want to check the mailbox before you leave tonight, I said, my voice smooth, not raised. There's been a change in ownership. You're technically trespassing. The air cracked. No one laughed. Daniel stood behind me silent. Margaret's eyes narrowed, then darted toward him. What is she talking about? I pulled a folded document from my coat pocket, placed it gently beside her wine glass. Deed transfer. Tax records. Full notarization. I let the papers fan out like a hand of cards. I own this house. Someone Lila may be let out of quiet. Oh my God. The rest didn't breathe. Margaret stared at the page like it was written in code. You can't do that, she said. I tilted my head. But I did. She stood fast, her chair screeching backward. You think this makes you powerful? She hissed. No, I said. It makes me present, which is something you never let me be. The line landed like a slap. Daniel's gaze dropped. Margaret said nothing. For once, she had no retort. Only the slow realization that the game she thought she controlled had changed boards entirely. And she didn't even know whose turn it was anymore. Margaret didn't sit back down. She hovered behind her chair like standing would protect her authority, as if proximity to the head of the table could reclaim it. But it was already gone. Taking the moment, I placed the deed beside her wine glass. The others at the table looked everywhere but at me. At their plates, their hands, the untouched food congealing on fine china. No one asked questions. No one defended her. That was the thing about power built on fear. Once the room senses a shift, the silence grows teeth. And Margaret was bleeding. She reached for the documents, flipped through them with the practiced disdain of someone used to dismissing things before understanding them. But I watched the moment recognition hit, the tilt of her head, the twitch of her left eye. You used Ruth's name, she said, venom threading her voice like wire. That's fraudulent. No, I said calmly, folding my hands in my lap. It's legal. I have the trust paperwork. I have the LLC filings. I have the lawyers. I learned from the best, remember? You always taught Daniel to keep things in other people's names. Her nostrils flared, and for the first time all night, Daniel looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but between us. She leaned over the table, fingers splayed like claws against the wood. This is my home. You can't just take it. I met her gaze, unblinking. But it's not your home. It's your memory. And I don't need to take that from you. You'll do that to yourself. The room inhaled, collective and shallow. Somewhere to my left, silverware clinked against porcelain. Lila's hand brushed her wine glass without lifting it. Margaret stared at me like I was a foreign language she'd once been fluent in, but had long since forgotten. I wasn't the girl who let her pick at my sentences anymore. I wasn't the woman who'd smiled through bruised dignity. I wasn't smiling at all. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, stripped of certainty. We need to talk separately. Not like this. I turned to him. We had years to talk. You chose silence. He swallowed hard. This doesn't have to get ugly. But it was already ugly, Daniel. You just dressed it in nice clothes. His eyes flicked toward his mother. She was shaking now, not from fear, but fury. You think this makes you better than us? She spat. No, I said. It makes me free of you. She reached for the documents again. But this time, her hand trembled too much to hold them steady. The pages slid onto the floor, and no one moved to pick them up. Her authority collapsed alongside them, quiet as a breath. You manipulated probate law, she muttered. But the words felt brittle, crumbling even as she said them. No, I replied. I paid attention. Margaret had always built her dominance in whispers, in knowing smiles, in being the one who knew things. But she didn't know me anymore. That was the real fracture. Not that I had outmaneuvered her, but that I had done it without permission, without performance. I'd become what she never expected, untethered. That made me dangerous. Not loud, not violent, just unmanageable. Lila finally spoke. You never even noticed the cracks, did you? Margaret turned sharply. Excuse me? You spent so long controlling the story, Lila said, her voice steady. You didn't notice someone else writing the ending. The tension snapped. Margaret turned toward the kitchen and left the room, her heels striking the floor harder than necessary. A moment later, cabinet doors opened and slammed shut. The dinner, the perfect performance she choreographed, was now a ghost. A half-eaten meal inside a house she no longer owned, in front of a woman she could no longer dismiss. Daniel stayed seated, pale, still. I didn't want it to be like this, he said quietly. But it is, I replied. He looked down at his plate. The roast he had carved now sat cold, untouched. I thought you'd fall apart. I did, I said. You just weren't watching. The door to the kitchen slammed. Margaret reappeared, carrying her purse and a wool coat slung over her arm. She didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even offer a parting threat. Just walked to the front door, twisted the knob, and stopped. Locked. I rose from my seat, walked slowly to the door, unlocked it without a word. She turned her head just enough to say, "You're not finished with me." "No," I said. "You're finished with me." And then I closed the door behind her. The morning after, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. That performative, heavy kind of stillness that follows an event no one wants to name. I sat in Margaret's chair, the one she always said supported her back better than the others, and sipped the coffee I made in her kitchen from her French press. The same blend she used, imported from a boutique roaster in Vermont. I didn't change a single thing. I wanted everything to remain familiar. Unsettlingly so. I wanted her to feel the absence of control like a missing tooth. Nagging, constant, impossible to ignore. Daniel came by that afternoon unannounced. He didn't knock. He still thought he had that right. I heard the front door creak open and close gently like guilt had weight. I didn't get up. I let him find me, and when he did, I didn't speak first. I let the silence press against him unrelenting. Finally, he sat on the couch across from me, elbows on his knees, like he was waiting for a verdict. But I wasn't his judge. Not anymore. He'd already sentenced himself to a life of cowardice wrapped in politeness. "She's not sleeping," he said. "My mom." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a personal issue." His jaw clenched. "She keeps calling me. Crying." I sipped my coffee. "She weaponized my absence for years. Now she can sit with hers." "She feels like you've humiliated her," he said. "She humiliated herself," I replied. I just handed her the mirror. He stood, started pacing the way he used to when nervous, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched. "I didn't know she was going to cut you out of the dinner," he said again, as if repetition could clean his conscience. "I should have. You should have stopped her 5 years ago," I said. "But you didn't." "Because it was easier to let her chip away at me than confront what that said about you." He stopped pacing. "I was trying to keep the peace." "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "You were trying to keep your comfort." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was final. He sat again, slower this time, like something in him had wilted. "She says she's contesting the sale," he muttered. I smiled. "She's welcome to try. But I have everything. The tax records, the deed, the trust filings. And I have time." Margaret always assumed people like me ran out of that first. She never imagined I'd wait. "She won't go quietly," he said. "She already did," I replied. "She just hasn't realized it yet." He leaned back, exhaled hard. "You were always smarter than she gave you credit for." "No," I said. "I was always smarter than you gave me credit for." And that finally landed. His eyes fell to the rug, the one she bought on a trip to Marrakesh and bragged about for years. "You loved me once," he said quietly. I didn't argue. That part was true. But love isn't a spell. It has an expiration date when it isn't fed. "I waited for you to see me," I said. "But you only looked when I disappeared." The unraveling had already begun. He just hadn't caught up to it yet. The emails had started arriving that morning. From old friends. From acquaintances who'd been at the dinner. Was that real? Did she really own the house? She didn't say a word, just sat there. God, it was brilliant. The story was spreading faster than Margaret could contain it. And the worst part for someone like her wasn't the loss of the house. It was the loss of the narrative. For once, she wasn't the one telling the story. She was in it. And she didn't come out looking good. Daniel stood again, but slower this time, like his body had grown heavier. "I guess this is the last time," he said. I nodded once. "You'll be fine." He looked at me like he wanted to say something else. Some half apology wrapped in sentiment. But there was nothing left to dress it in. So he just walked out. That evening Margaret called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was clipped, too controlled. She started with my name. Not you. Not that woman. My name. I don't know what you think you've proven, she said. But if you believe this makes you part of this family, you're mistaken. You'll never be one of us. I replayed it twice. Not because I needed to hear it, but because it confirmed the one truth she couldn't admit out loud. She was already losing, and it was killing her that I hadn't raised my voice once. I changed the locks the following Tuesday. Not out of spite, but necessity. I hired a different locksmith this time. A woman named Carla who didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. She worked fast and efficiently, wiping her hands on her jeans as she packed up her tools. You moving in? She asked casually, nodding toward the half-empty foyer. No, I said, watching the old brass cylinder clatter into her bag. I'm just making it mine. She didn't press. Just gave me a receipt and a firm handshake. It felt like the most honest exchange I'd had in years. The house looked the same, but something underneath it had shifted. Not the foundation, something quieter. The air felt different now, like it belonged to me. I walked room to room that afternoon with a slow, deliberate pace, the same way you do when you return to a place that once held your shadow. I didn't take photos. Didn't post anything. This moment wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Every quiet insult, every exclusion, every smile that meant stay small. It was all rooted here. And now it was mine. Every echo. Every wall. I thought about what Margaret said in that voicemail, about never being one of them. And she was right. I wasn't. I had twisted myself into shapes for so long trying to earn a seat at that table, not realizing the table had termites. The power I thought I wanted, their approval, their validation, it had never been real. It was just another performance, and I'd been cast as someone quiet enough not to threaten the lead. I had clung to their indifference like it was bad weather I just had to outlast. But it wasn't weather. It was a warning. And now for the first time I wasn't under their roof. They were under mine. The divorce finalized without ceremony. No court battle. No dramatic last-minute filings. Just a slim envelope with the judgment inside, stamped and unceremonious. Daniel signed quickly, almost too quickly, as if he wanted to outrun the version of himself that had once promised to love me loudly, protectively. I didn't feel joy when I saw his signature. I felt clarity. It had always been easy for him to retreat when things got uncomfortable. That was the story of our marriage. My pain made him tired, and his silence made me small. I mailed a final check to the attorney and never spoke his name again. I rented the house out 2 months later. Not for income. I didn't need the money. It was something cleaner than that. I didn't want to live there. I didn't need to sit in a shrine to old wounds. But I wanted the control. The choice. A small family moved in. A woman with a daughter and a border collie named Nixie. The little girl ran barefoot across the same hardwood floors Margaret used to polish with military precision. She laughed loudly. Slammed doors. Left handprints on the windows. It was beautiful. The kind of chaos I was never allowed to bring into that space. I kept the rent below market. I didn't tell them the story. The house had enough ghosts. It didn't need my voice echoing inside it. Lila and I stayed in touch. Not often. Just enough. She sent a postcard once from Iceland. On the back it read, "They still talk about that night." Quietly. Like a cautionary tale. I kept it pinned to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. I liked the sourness of it. The reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come loud or fast. It comes slowly in increments, with a steady hand and a clean signature on a deed. I didn't date again right away. Didn't fill the silence with strangers. I let myself be whole in the quiet without performance. I started baking again, not for approval, just because I liked the way cinnamon made the air feel warm. I walked without headphones. Took long showers. Relearned the sound of my own voice. It had changed. It was lower now. Sharper. Clearer. Like something forged instead of born. On the 1-year anniversary of the dinner, I drove past the house. The porch light was on. A child's bicycle lay sideways on the lawn. Someone was burning something in the fireplace. Probably wood, but the smoke smelled sweet, almost like pine. I didn't stop. Just watched for a moment from the car, then drove on. The house was still standing, but the version of me that once begged to be welcomed inside, She was gone. And this new self, the one who knew how to walk away with nothing but her name, and still end up with the whole house. That woman didn't need an invitation anymore. She was the door. If this story stayed with you, do one thing before you scroll. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment if it hit a nerve. And subscribe for more stories that don't flinch, don't sugarcoat, and don't forget. See you soon.